The Fields Effect by Dr. Alon Giladi.
Opening move. I have nothing to offer you but 3 particles, and 1 more, and 2 forces, and 1 more, and the path to truth. In this article, I will challenge the scientific physical convention that the experiments required to test the theory of relativity prove the theory of relativity beyond a reasonable doubt. I will show you in this lesson that it is not enough that these experiments are irrelevant to the theory of relativity as some critics have claimed, and not only that they are supposedly relevant to one component of the theory of relativity, as others have claimed, but that these experiments refute the special and general theories of relativity in their entirety. At the same time, I will present to you the correct model, the correct theory that replaces the erroneous space-time theory, which replaced the erroneous ether theory, and this theory, this model, is the model of the center theory, in which the effect of the fields replaces the subject of space-time and the relative time and space that don't exist, with the framework of the fundamental principle according to which there is no particle without a field, and there is no field without a particle. Refutation move. I came, I saw, I refuted, and not relatively. I will now proceed to examine the formulas used in these experiments, namely the horizontal formula delta T equals V squared divided by 2 times C squared, and the vertical formula delta T equals H times G divided by C squared, which in a sidebar of course should be noted that the test is done using an atomic clock and the like, when according to Einstein, time flows and space expands or contracts regardless of the local physical aspect, as I will show you later. And in any case, this test shows us that on the one hand, the horizontal formula of these experiments, as will be explained and detailed, is exactly the same as the time component of Lorentz, but on the other hand, it is not required for Lorentz formulas on the subject of space, when according to Lorentz, we are in a combined physical matter, that is, someone who is supposedly inside the light within the framework of the horizontal arm of Michelson and Morley feels because of the ether, the contraction of his size, which was later interpreted after the removal of the ether by Einstein as a contraction of space, and also feels that the rhythm of the clock, due to the encounter with the ether, slows down. That is, the time supposedly according to Einstein, after the ether goes out, lengthens relative to the stationary observer. Special relativity. It should be noted that the relatively accurate results of the time deviation in the traveling body, satellite/airplane, etc., compared to the stationary observer on Earth, are in accordance with the so-called Einstein combination of the vertical minus component, that is, slowing down the clock rate, lengthening of time, and the vertical plus, that is accelerating the clock rate, shortening of time due to moving away from the center of the space-time distortion due to the nearby star, the Earth. In any case, the accuracy of these results immediately shows that Lorentz's lack of consideration of the gravitational component, or, according to Einstein, the space-time distortion, was an error. But on the other hand, it can be noted here that he probably believed that there was no connection between the light wave and gravity, and therefore there was no need to consider the vertical component. In addition, with regard to the 2 arms that are facing each other, according to Michelson and Morley, and horizontal to the Earth, we immediately see that Lorentz's space component does not accept any relation in the formulas and experiments that tested the time deviation, as if between the stationary observer and the traveler, and this is related to what I said before, that according to Einstein, and unlike Lorentz, there is no physical effect here, but a relative change of time and a relative change of space, both of which are a kind of geometric network that sustains the universe. Well, the first assumption is that here, in fact, a claim for a change in time is being physically tested, which is not a physical change, without considering and without testing the space component. This test, in addition to the time aspect, could have confirmed or refuted the claim for the existence of the theory of relativity in this matter. Here it is worth noting that Lorentz determined that the rate of a clock changes. That is, its rate slows down when it is in a body that is traveling at speed, and its internal space is shortened due to the effect of the ether. The ether dropped, and Einstein, without an intermediary physical factor, moved to pure mathematics without actual physics. That is, there is no actual physical effect of time, of space, on the clock in the traveling body, when according to Lorentz it is quite clear. And why? Because if there is a body moving at speed, and the ether slows it down uniformly, that is, the ether that is present throughout the universe uniformly meets with it, then it simultaneously affects both the slowing down of its hands and the contraction of the body of the clock, or another body, or its spatial interaction with another body, what Einstein called, without the ether, a shrinking space. Here, with Lorentz, he reduces his body because he opposes it, and he also necessarily simultaneously slows down the rate of his hands, etc. Therefore, according to Lorentz, the length physically changes simultaneously with the change in the rate component. Or in other words, the time that the mobile observer sees on his watch is equal to the time that the stationary observer sees on his watch multiplied by the Lorentz constant, which is 1 divided by the root of 1 minus v squared divided by c squared. In contrast, the length of the clock hand, or the space between it and another body for the traveling observer, is equal to the length that the stationary observer experiences divided by Lorentz's constant, namely, divided by 1 divided by the root of 1 minus v squared divided by c squared. And we see the physical logic here, namely, Lorentz believes that the force of the ether that acts uniformly on the clock moving at speed, that is, a certain distance divided by time, changes the rate of the clock in such a way that its size is compressed/contracted, and its rate therefore slows down. That is, the time it expresses lengthens. In contrast with Einstein, as soon as the ether has dropped, the rate on the satellite must be uniform, unchanging, while against the stationary one there must be a deviation according to the formulas. And the same applies to space, which is not examined here according to the Lorentz formula, as the contraction or expansion of space itself, and not the traveling body, and this is the alphabet, meaning that there is no physical intermediary factor, ether, and it cannot be that the rate of the clock on the plane or on the satellite, that is, in the traveling body, will change as it was with Lorentz, but rather it must be uniform in itself and relative when tested against the rate of the stationary observer by the difference in deviation. And here, the convention believed that these experiments proved this because the atomic clocks before boarding the satellite are calibrated exactly according to the deviation expected according to the formulas, and when they are observed from Earth, the deviation is supposedly corrected. If it had not been corrected, then it would have been impossible to act on the GPS issue. We would have had extensive deviations. And of course, the same would have been true in the other experiments in relation to the two formulas according to their relevance in a specific experiment. And from this, the convention scientists concluded that it was a change in time relative to someone traveling on a satellite or a plane, etc., compared to the observer seemingly stationary on Earth, without changing the rate of the clock on the satellite relative to the satellite itself. And here, Dr. Giladi went to check whether they had checked the clock rate on the satellite itself, or on the plane, etc. That is, whether the rate on the satellite itself changes, or in other words, we get on the plane, satellite see the rate of the clock before it goes into the air, then go into the air, and then check its rate again. Now, what does it turn out? It turns out that to Dr. Giladi's amazement, no experiment did this. They did not check whether there was a change in the rate of the clock on the satellite itself, nor did they check whether there was a change in space, which is not mentioned at all in these formulas. And we are talking about billions-dollar experiments here, about experiments that actually sought to prove the theory of relativity. It was simply possible to set up a non-electromagnetic clock to check whether the rate or the distance between its parts changes, and even more so to check physically on a satellite or spacecraft, whether the rate in an atomic clock changes and whether the distance between its parts, between the electron and the nucleus, changes, or whether they are constant. And what Dr. Giladi saw is that the explanations there were that Einstein said that the rate on the satellite is necessarily constant, meaning that the understanding of convention is axiomatic, and therefore there is no need to check. How much more so with regard to what is called space contraction, or the distance between the parts of the clock, etc. Do you understand? Einstein said, I would say the guru. Einstein said, then there is no need to check. He said that this is the theory of relativity, and that's it. This is how conventional science proves the most important theory, together with quantum theory, the most important theory on which all modern physics is based. That is, Einstein said, period. If and when they see that the rate is not uniform on the satellite and the deviation is found on the satellite, or that the magnitude or the distance between the parts of the clock changes, then Einstein falls immediately, and there is no relativity. And how do they actually see the calibration system? That is, the proof of the deviation of time, the relativity of time from their point of view. What they see is the correction of the deviation due to the calibration according to the connection of the horizontal and vertical formula. And this is done using an electromagnetic beam that comes out of the satellite, from the atomic clock on the satellite at the speed of light, and passes to the collection point, the reception on Earth. That is, according to the convention in these experiments, the satellite's clock is measured on Earth using the beam that is transmitted from it to Earth at the speed of light. Or in other words, the beam comes out of the atomic clock and shows a deviation exactly according to the current measurement options, exactly according to the formula in values of nanoseconds in its time component only, and of course they do not check the space, but only the time component. But when Dr. Giladi observed these experiments in an exemplary manner, what did he saw? What will you see now? What we see is that in fact on Earth, they do not check the atomic clock, but check the electromagnetic beam that came out of it. The test is of the beam, and therefore the conclusions you will see here, as a result of this correct observation, are unequivocal conclusions. Einstein fell. There is no relativity. As mentioned, when we observe the horizontal component, we actually see Lorentz in terms of time. That we observe Lorentz in terms of time, we know that after removing the ether, the expression of time for the traveler changes according to the time of the stationary observer multiplied by Lorentz's constant. Lorentz's constant is 1 divided by the root of 1 minus v squared divided by c squared. What happens when we place c squared on the v squared? What happens is that we are actually at 1 divided by 0. That is, there are different claims here on how to relate exactly to 1 divided by 0. That is, 1 divided by 0 multiplied by the time of the stationary observer. Some claims that it is an undefined number, some claims that it is infinity. In my opinion, these claims are wrong. If we look from the perspective of the one, then in fact we can claim that the changing time is equal to the time of the stationary one. But without going into formulas right now in this situation, according to Einstein, the formula is not relevant to light that has no mass. It is relevant to mass. It is not relevant to light that has no mass, or to speeds above the speed of light. After all, if we put in this formula, the Lorentz constant on which Einstein bases the special relativity, if we put here a speed that is higher than the speed of light, then we will be in general an irrational or unreal number, that is, 1 divided by the minus root of something. But in any case, what is clear, and we are currently examining whether these experiments confirmed the theory of relativity, or irrelevant to the theory of relativity, or whether they refuted the theory of relativity. In any case, we are in Einstein, and according to Einstein, and also according to all current scientific physical convention, there is no doubt that time, so to speak, freezes within the race of the electromagnetic ray, at the speed of light of the electromagnetic ray, from the point where it began to the point where it is absorbed. When we look at Andromeda, the light coming from Andromeda takes a picture for us of exactly what happened there about 2.5 million years ago. In other words, we see what happened exactly 2.5 million years ago. In other words, the electromagnetic ray takes a picture for us of exactly what happened from the moment it came out, until it reached us. And so, since we receive the same electromagnetic beam from the satellite, from the atomic clock on the satellite, and we receive from it a change in the rate of the atomic clock exactly according to the formula, exactly according to the combination of the vertical formula and the horizontal formula, because that is why they were calibrated on the ground. This is conclusive proof that the atomic clock on the satellite changed its rate, and its rate was not constant, as it had to be according to Einstein. This is proof beyond any doubt. We know that the theory of relativity does not work, neither in the small dimensions nor in the large dimensions of the universe, but this is proof against the experiments that the convention claimed to prove it, and they do not prove it. But not only do they not prove it, not only do they not confirm it, they themselves refutes the special and general theories of relativity. Moreover, this is proof that Lorentz was right about the horizontal component, and it is also clear why, because the change in the clock's rate is the result of some external factor. It is not the ether, but it is another factor that simultaneously affects the physical matter of changing the size and rate of the clock if we are at a higher speed than the stationary observer, or in other words, simultaneous physical effect on the slowing down of the electron's rate inside the atomic clock compared to the nucleus, which supposedly shows us time that is lengthening, and on the other hand, it is a simultaneous physical effect on the distance between it and the nucleus, which is shortening. And this is exactly Lorentz, and this is really not Einstein. In other words, Lorentz's statement of a simultaneous physical connection between the rate and the size is in itself a correct statement. Similarly, the calculation of the rate by means of what is attributed to the horizontal formula in itself is correct. What is not correct with Lorentz is the existence of the ether, and is the lack of consideration of the vertical component, gravity, according to his method, or space-time distortion, according to Einstein. But in terms of simultaneity and the time component in itself, it is a correct statement, because it is a physical observation according to the laws of nature. But Einstein's observation, the mathematical observation that distinguishes between the physical matter and the abstract mathematical matter of changing time, flowing time, relative time without direct physical influence of particles and forces, etc. That observation of Einstein is a completely wrong observation. We have laws of nature here, we have physics here. The meeting of the electron, opposite the nucleus in something else, not with the ether, but in something else, as will be explained shortly. We do not have a universe of space-time here. We do not have relative time and relative space here without a direct connection of natural laws to the physics of materials and proofs. We have here a network of fields within the framework of the theory of the center, within the framework of the principle according to which there is no field without a particle, and there is no particle without a field. Doctrine move, the leap of the way. The sleeper has awakened to the new old world. Now that Einstein has fallen, and before that Lorentz fell, let us attend to the correct model, and this will of course be a model that can be refuted. First, the first basic assumption will be that the formulas that were set up to test the effect of speed and distance from the Earth, and in fact from the rest of the universe, are approximately correct. The second basic assumption will be that there is no particle without a field, and there is no field without a particle. The third basic assumption is that there are three particles in the universe beyond the central point, namely the alphatron, the positron, and the electron, and two fields. The strong field, which is a special case of the central field at the central point, and will be accompanied by the alphatron in a main way, and later we will discuss its matter in connection with the color of the positron and the electron. And the second force is an expression of the electromagnetic field accompanied by the positron and the electron. That is, two forces, two fields in the universe beyond the central point. The fourth basic assumption is that all the measurements, all these experiments that sought to prove the theory of relativity were required for the implications of the electromagnetic fields accompanying the electrons in atomic clocks and the like, and therefore for their potential, that is, for c, the speed of light, and not for other fields belonging to the second force in the universe, that is neither less nor more than the central force and its specific expression beyond the center point, that is, for the strong force that accompanied the alphatron in a primary way. A fifth basic assumption would be that each electron and each positron, with the positron in the opposite direction, is accompanied by an electric field that emanates from it radially in all directions and to infinity, with a decrease in energy, and also that in motion, a magnetic field is added infinitely in rotation towards the entire universe. The sixth basic assumption is that each alphatron, which is the smallest particle in the universe, is added a strong field as a special case of the central field, when the alphatron is in rotation at speeds infinitely greater than the rotations at which the electron and positron are. The seventh basic assumption is that at the center point of the universe, most of the mass of the universe is concentrated by means of identical adatrons carrying zero charge, and the central force in all directions of the universe, when they are each and together in the framework of the enormous central rotation at the central point, with the central force towards the entire universe, which revolves around them with the local effects of each and every component in the universe on the other. The eighth premise is that the positron and the electron have a color in relation to the alphatron in the same direction, while the differences between them in this specific matter and the strong force as a special case of the central force are in their distance from the alphatron, whether it is inside the proton or inside the atom, their mass compared to the minimal mass of the alphatron, and the manner of rotation around themselves, which in the alphatron field is fundamental, and in the electron field is secondary compared to its radial principle. Now let's approach the horizontal arm with the correct formula, which is not only delta T equal to T0 times Lorentz's constant, but it is also delta L equal to L0 divided by Lorentz's constant. And here Lawrence was right, because these two modes describe one physical reality and are necessarily simultaneous. The electron in the satellite's atomic clock moves at a rate equal to the nucleus, at a uniform rate equal to the nucleus, and at the speed of the body it is inside, meaning that in the satellite it inevitably encounters a global electromagnetic network. Of all the electrons that are not ionized by the positrons in the world, and by the few free positrons that are not ionized by electrons. Here, a question could be asked. If it encounters some kind of electromagnetic grid, then why is there no difference in the behavior of each electron in different places with respect to the horizontal formula regarding the change in rate and the untested formula of the change in size? If so, why would the effect of that grid on the electron's rate in one place not be different from another place, like, for example, one place that is closer to a stronger electromagnetic field of a certain star than another place? Well, the answer to this, which will be explained later, is that the electron and its field do not feel at all the difference in the context of the speed at which they are in relation to that network. Any difference in the strength of this or that electromagnetic field, because they feel at every moment only the field in a point length when they intersect with them, and things will be explained and clarified later. Therefore, instead of the ether that did not exist and was not created, we have before us a physical factor, which operates according to the laws of nature, unlike the geometric structure for mathematicians of relative time, relative space, in the theory of special relativity, and space-time that distorts against mass, etc., in Einstein's general theory of relativity. The ether moves aside, space-time moves aside, and what enters is the global electromagnetic network in front of that electron in the atomic clock, in front of that field of that electron, the global electromagnetic network that necessarily networks the entire universe. The reaction against the same grid, therefore at the speed of the electron, is the same reaction. It is uniform and is the change in rate. The electron changes its frequency due to the influence of the global electromagnetic grid in a uniform manner, which is related horizontally to the speed according to the formula of minus v squared divided by 2c squared, and to the issue of size according to the change in size, equal to the original size divided by the Lorentz constant, plus the vertical component that I will discuss now. And therefore, it is required to calibrate the atomic clock on the ground before it goes up to the satellite. After the satellite detaches from the Earth, we obtain the result of its rate deviation due to its encounter with the electromagnetic grid using the electromagnetic beam that photographs the rate created due to the same speed of the satellite, in complete contrast to Einstein and in accordance with Lorentz, but with a small difference, without the ether. On the other hand, in the vertical component that was not taken into account by Lorentz, we see something completely different from Einstein's claim for space-time distortion. Here we see the direct effect of the distance from the nearest star and in fact of all the factors of the universe, although our measurements only allow resolutions that are mainly related to the effect of the Earth, the nearest star, in relation to that plane, that satellite, etc., on which the atomic clock is located. And here we move on to the correct explanation. What is that effect of the Earth? The ether went out, moved aside, and the space-time distortion moved aside. So what is left? Something else remains. Something else and amazing remains. The direct effect here on the electron is not of an ether or of an unphysical effect of a space-time distortion that does not exist, but of a field accumulation of the strong force accompanying the alphatron as a special case of the central force. This is a global field accumulation of the strong force accompanying the alphatrons in the universe as a whole, and of the central accumulation of the adatrons at the central point. Our measurements can currently focus on the effect of the nearest star, that is, on the effect of the alphatrons on the Earth. Moreover, they are not required at all to measure the strong force, but rather for its indirect effect on the behavior of the electron in front of the nucleus in the atomic clock, on the rate in the electromagnetic field of the electron in the atomic clock. The electron with the color is located at a distance from the entire accumulation of alphatrons on Earth. As it moves away, the effect of this accumulation becomes weaker. And here you will ask again, but why uniformly in front of every corner of the planet, since in every corner it can be argued that there is a different color? The answer to this is clear, and is seen already in the atom in relation to the electron, or in the proton in relation to the positron, and between them to the electron. Already in the atom, the distance experienced by the electron in front of the small alphatron is enormous in relation to the small dimensions of the alphatron, and in relation to the dimensions of the electron, and even more so as it moves away from Earth. These are distances of enormous magnitude, when, from the perspective of the electron, the accumulation that it feels of the alphatrons on the planet Earth and the entire universe is a uniform effect in every place and place where it is located. The electron therefore has a color in relation to the alphatron in relation to the alphatron's field. And here I leave for further study a discussion of the fundamental meaning of the essence of the color and the detail of its action on the electron in relation to the alphatron and the adatron, which will be clarified later. As stated, the two forces that shape the universe are the electromagnetic force and the strong force as products of the central force, just as the three particles, the alphatron, the positron, and the electron, are products of the central particle, the adatron to which the central force is attached. The difference between them, among other things, is that the electromagnetic force or field acts in a combination of fundamental electric radiality and magnetic rotationality in the movement of the electron or the movement of the positron in the opposite direction, while the particular and general central force acts in a fundamental rotational manner and at enormous speeds, both in the smallest particle in the universe, that is, in the vicinity of the alphatron, and in the largest particle in the universe at the central point, that is, in the action of the adatron, or the accumulation of adatrons at the central point itself. Hence, it can be assumed at this stage that color is necessarily a rotational property of a central field when on the electron or on the positron it is at speeds infinitely less than the speeds of the alphatron and the adatron, and it is the one that responds to the rotation of the particular and general central force, with a length of distance-dependent attraction, and as mentioned, we will leave this matter for now. As mentioned, these are distances of enormous orders of magnitude between the alphatron cluster and the electron in the atomic clock, and for that electron, certainly the ability to measure the effect here at this stage. This is a uniform effect wherever it is located in relation to the Earth and in relation to the entire universe. This ratio is measured in the formulas before us according to the direct effect on the color of the electron in the atomic clock and its rate, and indirectly is expressed in the measured effect on the electromagnetic field of the electron in the atomic clock. That is, it weakens uniformly the greater the distance, and therefore the further it moves away from that alphatron cluster on the Earth, the faster the rate accelerates, or as if time is shortening in relation to an atomic clock on the Earth, and it is not shortening. The rate accelerates regardless of the location, of course, and also regardless of that space-time distortion that doesn't exist. The formula for delta t here is equal to h, height, relative to the Earth, multiplied by g, the acceleration, divided by c squared. And it expresses the indirect effect of the strong force of the alphatron cluster, mainly that on the Earth and in fact of the entire universe, as well as of the atatron cluster at the central point. Although these, in our means of testing, are now unmeasurable and constitute a very negligible effect on the rate of the electron in the atomic clock on the satellite relative to the rate of an atomic clock on the Earth. And hence, we are in the influence of two fields, in the influence of two forces, not only of the electromagnetic force, but also of the central force in its particular and general sense, both of which are a uniform effect that coincides according to the present means of measurement. The two horizontal and vertical formulas, namely, of minus v squared, divided by 2 times c squared, plus h times g divided by c squared, namely, in terms of electromagnetic observation only. Here we have conclusive proof that the theory of relativity is fundamentally flawed. It does not hold up in the fundamental parts of the universe, small or large. It is refuted by the very experiments that are claimed to prove it beyond any doubt. The atomic clock is always affected by two forces at a speed and altitude relative to an atomic clock on Earth: the electromagnetic force and the central force, general and specific. In the field's effect, associated with the three particles, the alphatron, the positron, and the electron that make up the universe apart the central point, and with the central particle from which they were created, the atatron, at the central point. And that's all. Not ether, not space-time, but physics, laws of nature, on the way to truth that will never be fully achieved.
All rights reserved to Dr. Alon Giladi.